Welcome back to another Zenatta Consulting video. I'm Greg Belknap, Director of Zoho Development here at Zenatta Consulting. Today, I'd like to show you how you can get data pushed from the CRM to analytics that might be outside of the built-in integrations between those two systems. If you enjoy this video, please give it a like, comment, share, subscribe, and let's jump into it. So today's tip is referring to when occasionally you'll have some data in the CRM in some fashion that can't make its way over into analytics natively. If I'm here in my data sources, I can go to the Zoho CRM edit setup and we'll get a list of all the different modules we can pull from. So I have leads, and then I have any subforms on that, lead notes, contact notes, accounts, account notes, deal notes, etc., as well as things like stage history, tasks, anything and everything. Well, actually, not anything and everything. One of the bits that doesn't come over, for example, is pipeline information. Now, in the deals table, you can see what pipeline a deal is connected to. So if I go to look at deals, then I have a column that says what pipeline my deal is in, and I can see what stage my deal is in, but I don't know what stages are assigned to this particular pipeline. Just doesn't come in, and there is no option to sync it over. So what you can do if you needed to have that information available, you can set up a scheduled custom function that will pull that information from the CRM and then import it into Zoho Analytics. So we're going to do that through Deluge. We're going to start with creating a scheduled function. But first, just to give you some context, I'll be working with these two pipelines here in the inventory layout. And pipelines are divided up by layout as well. So you have different pipelines or no pipelines at all, depending on the layout that you're using. But we'll go to the settings, then under automation, we will go to schedules, and let's go ahead and make a new schedule. I'm going to call this sync pipeline info to analytics. And let's add a description, daily sync of deal pipeline metadata to Zoho Analytics workspace. Function to be executed, we're going to need to write our own function, and we'll call this a similar thing. It'll be sync pipelines to analytics. So what are we going to be doing in this function? Well, first we will need to pull pipeline information from the CRM. Then we'll need to prepare that data for entry into analytics. And then we'll have send the data to analytics. So first, pulling the pipeline information. There are no direct integration tasks, a zoho.crm function that we can use. We're going to have to use an API call using the invoke URL task. So to start off, doing an invoke URL, I'll call this pipelines. And now I need a URL, I need the type, any parameters, and then rather than headers, we'll be using a connection. So the URL we get by searching for the CRM API documentation. And here I want to make sure that I'm using the most up-to-date version. So we'll go ahead and use version 4. Then in the REST APIs, we're going to look for metadata APIs because we're talking about not data of specific deals, accounts, or contacts, but we're looking for information about the system as a whole. So that's what metadata refers to, data about how we hold our data. So here are our metadata APIs, and there is the pipeline, and we have get pipelines. So you can get all the pipelines for a specific layout within the deals module. And down here, I have a sample request as well as explaining the parameters. So this part here, this CURL, or curl as we often end up calling it, I'm going to copy this URL, come back here to the code editor, and I'm going to paste that into this URL line. Now, this is not the correct layout ID because this is an ID from the example. So I need to get the layout ID from my system. And the way that we can do that, we'll go to Settings, then go to Customization Modules and Fields, then go to our Deals, and then the only layout that has any pipelines is the inventory layout. So I will click on that layout, and then up here in the URL, this long number at the end is referring to the ID of the layout. So I will copy that, come back to my code editor, and I will replace that layout ID. Then we have a type. The request type you can see in a couple different spots. One is on the sample request. Here there's an example of the kind of headers that would be included. This is saying that the method is a get. You can also see over on the left-hand side that this is a get type. And then you can also see it here by the endpoints that these are both get types. The other types are post, put, and delete. But we know this one is going to be a get, so we will enter that. Then we have parameters. If there were additional requirements that this API endpoint needed, we could put those in here, usually either as a string or as a JSON map. However, the only ID that we need, the only parameter that we need in this particular call is just the layout ID. And we've already included that in the URL, so we don't need to include it in the body as a parameter. So I can actually just remove that. And then finally, we need a connection. The connection refers to the permission that is set up between Zoho CRM and Zoho Analytics to say, or Zoho CRM and itself, to say that we are allowed to request information from our own CRM. And the way that we're going to get to that, I'll come back to the settings and go back to our layouts, go back again so that we get all the way back to the settings page. Then over here on the left, I want to scroll down to developer space. And the third option down here is connections. So I'll click on that. Now I already have quite a few connections made in this demo account. Yours may be empty when you first start out, or if you have had developers come and create custom code for you, you also may see some different things populated in here. What I want to look for is, in this case, I'm making an API call to the Zoho CRM. So I'm going to look for a connection that maybe already exists that has to do with the CRM. So I'll click on this, and here I can see what are the different scopes, or what are the different permissions that this particular connection has. If I go back and look at my pipelines documentation, it says that the scope that I need is zohocrm.settings.pipeline.read. So let's go and take a look at that connection, and let's see what we have. Now, we don't have the Zoho settings.pipeline.read, but we do have zohocrm.settings.all. So because we have this .all, that means that any API call that requires a scope that begins with zohocrm.settings is covered by this connection. And they have a little sample code here for you of what it would look like. All we need is, because we've already built the rest of it, we only need this little piece down here that I can't seem to copy. So that's okay. It's just called Zoho CRM. We can just go type it in ourselves. Then our connection will be Zoho CRM. And then let's info pipelines just to make sure that things are coming through correctly. And yes, it looks like I am getting the pipeline information. I can copy all of this, and I can go to my JSON viewer, click on Make Pretty, and here I can see that there is a pipeline that has a list attached to it, as noted by the square bracket here. I can see that each entry in this list has a particular pipeline, and then in that pipeline, I have this thing called maps that inside of it has each of the stages associated to that pipeline in sequence. Great. Now I can see that for any given pipeline, for any given pipeline stage, I have the pipeline name, then for each stage, I have a display value, a sequence number, then a forecast type or an ID. I can pull over as much or as little of this information as I want. Mostly, I think right now I'm just going to focus on getting the display value, the sequence number, and the forecast type. And then, of course, the pipeline that it belongs to. So now we need to prepare where our data is going to go. So I'm going to come back into Analytics, and let's create a new table. And I'm going to scroll all the way down and just go ahead and select Enter Data Right Away. It's just creating a blank table with a bunch of empty columns in it. I'm going to go ahead and save this table, and I'll leave it under Zoho CRM Modules Data. And I'll go ahead and call this Pipeline Stages. Save that. Now that it's saved, I'm actually going to click Edit Design, and I'm going to change some of these columns here. Here I could also define whether or not these columns need to be mandatory, if they should have a default value, if they would contain personal data. Don't have to worry about any of that though, so I'm just going to hit Save and Close. And I'll come back to my empty table here. Okay, so we have a table in this workspace that has these three columns, all of the type text of pipeline, stage name, and forecast type. So now let's go back to our schedule, and we have to prepare the data for entry into analytics. So I'm going to have to sort through each pipeline. Data is equal to pipelines.get pipeline. And then for each pipeline in pipeline data, pipeline name is going to be, let's check in the JSON formatter. Looks like it's under display value. So we'll go ahead and do that. Pipeline.get display value. And now we need to get the stages within the pipeline. So pipeline stages equals pipeline.get maps. Now we need to get each stage name as well as the stage type, the forecast type. So for each stage in pipeline stages, stage name is equal to stage.get, and I believe this is display value, similar to the pipeline. Yep, display value, and then we're going to want forecast underscore type. So display underscore value, and then type equals stage.get forecast underscore type. And we'll call this stage type just to be consistent. Okay, so I'm going to be able to sort through and get all this information, but I have to put it somewhere. Each row of data is going to need to be a map, and then we'll need to put all those maps together into one big list. So before we start the first for each loop, let's create a data list. At the beginning of the for each stage loop, we're going to want to create a data map. Now we'll want to take all of our variables and package them into our JSON array. So we have our data map.put, and what we're going to want to do is use the column names of our table in analytics in here. So we have 3 different columns, right? Pipeline, stage name, forecast type. And these ones we can actually just use the actual display value as it shows up in the column. So we have pipeline is going to equal pipeline name, data map dot put. Then we have stage name is stage name, data map dot put forecast type as stage type. And then once we've built this map, we need to add it to our data list. Okay, so now if I info data list, I'll go ahead and comment out our info pipelines. And here we go. We have ourselves, make that pretty. There you go. Now, as you can see, I have all these different rows of data of a particular pipeline, then at least one of the stage names and the particular type of that stage name. So now I can see all these different rows of data. Finally, we need to push this data from this data list. We need to push this data list into analytics. So we're going to have to make another API call. So I'm going to go to Zoho Analytics API, and there's a V1 and a V2. You're definitely going to want to use the V2. It's much easier to work with. And then very similar to the way we got the pipeline information from the CRM, we're going to look for the particular API action we need to make, take a look at the URL, any parameters that we need to add, and we'll create the invoke URL in our CRM function. While we're waiting for the API documentation to load up, I'm going to go ahead and create another invoke URL here. And we'll call this import data. And this one we actually are going to need some extra pieces. So I'm going to add connection, but leave the other parameters and headers that we removed previously and leave them there. So I know there's a lot to unpack here, but I'll take you through it, not to worry. First thing we have to do is we have to take that list of data that we created and we have to turn it into a file that we're going to pass into analytics as if we were uploading it and importing it. So data list is our JSON list. So here where I've got JSON list variable, I'm going to add data list, and we're doing a to file. And then I'll call this, what do I want that file's name to be? Let's have it be pipelines.json. This can really be anything. It just needs to be .json. And then I'll call this, we'll call it data file, because that's what it is. It's a file. Then there's a unique thing where you have to take that data file variable and do this set param name to file, so that it's sort of a meta tag that the API system needs to be able to see to know, well, let's see, I'm looking for a specific thing called file. Let me go find it. So that's how it finds it, is there's the param name for it versus the file's name. There's the file's name, and then there's the name of the variable that the file needs to be attached to. Then we have our org, workspace, and view ID that we need to populate. So you get your org ID by going to analytics, going to your organization settings, and then it's up in the URL. So we'll put in that ID. Then your workspace ID and view ID, you want to go back to your table that we're going to import into, and both numbers are up here in the URL. Workspace over by the word workspace, and then the view ID next to the word view. So first I'll copy the workspace, and then I'll copy the view. Great. Now that I've got those, so I have to use the org ID to pass that in as a header. Then there's this thing that the analytics wants. It wants a config object. So we create a map, and then we decide how we're going to import. You can insert, update, add, or just update. I'm going to have us do just insert to make this easier. Our file type is JSON. There is a specific auto-identify parameter that identifies the format that the JSON is in, so we'll want to have that set to true. Matching columns, we only need that if we were doing an updating or upserting. We're just going to be adding for right now. So this is all we need. Then our parameters that are going to be added to the end of our URL. So we have config is made up of this config map. Now we'll actually have the URL call where we have our workspace ID and our view ID and our parameters being passed in. This one is a post type. We have our headers that were defined up here. And then finally, we need to put our JSON file variable down here, which, if you'll remember, is called data file. And then finally, we have to include a connection that at least has the Zoho reports.data.read or .write. And let's just make sure that there is one called analytics. And it looks like there is already one called analytics. And just double check what scope we have. Okay, so we have a full access scope, so we are good to go there. All right, and then I have an info for the response because I want to see what happens when that data comes through. And we'll save and execute. Let's see. Okay, looks like we have a invalid attribute. I used the wrong word for the import type. It's not insert. It's either append, update add, or truncate add. We'll actually do truncate add. Truncate add means that we're going to delete everything that used to be in there and then just replace it with everything that we've pulled just now. Since we're pulling all of the pipelines, we can just do truncate add. So that'll be our import type. So we'll run that again. Success! So I can come back over to our data table here for pipeline stages. Click this little refresh button. And voila, you can see that all of our pipeline stages are there, along with the pipeline name, the particular stage name, and then the forecast type. And if I were to change one of these pipelines, so for example, let's go to customization, modules and fields. Well, actually, let's go to pipelines. And let's go ahead and add closed loss to competition to the short pipeline. All right, so right now, we only have one closed loss to competition, and it is attached to the standard inventory pipeline. But if I rerun our schedule, it's going to truncate or clear out the table and then add the new data. So now if we refresh, we go from having 15 rows of data to 16 rows of data. And now you can see we have two closed loss to competition, one attached to the standard inventory pipeline and one attached to our short pipeline. Okay, so our code is working. Now we just have to finish setting up the schedule. So now that we have the function to be executed, we decide when our schedule is going to start. So I probably only need to have this done, once a day. Pipeline stages are not going to change very often. So I'll go ahead and set it for tomorrow let's do it nice and early at 1 a.m. or 1:30. And then I can choose how often this is going to go. Honestly, I'd probably be fine just doing it every week or every year, but we'll go ahead and just say every day. It doesn't use too many API credits, so we can go ahead and just let that run. And I'm okay if it never ends. I'll go ahead and hit save. And there you have it. Now I have a scheduled function that is going to, once a day, pull the pipeline stage information and make sure that those stages are up to date here for use in my analytics tables. So from here, I can change these into lookup columns and have them match with other data tables. Or I can create formula columns or aggregate formulas based off of this information. And yeah, now I have access to information in Zoho Analytics that otherwise would not be available. And there it is, how to create a Zoho Analytics table for a scheduled function to populate data from the CRM. Now, of course, it doesn't have to just be the CRM. You could set up this kind of analytics connection with any of the other Zoho apps. Just creating a function inside of that particular Zoho app and pointing it towards an analytics table. The trick is making sure that your data is packaged appropriately so that it shows up in the correct formatting that you want, and then setting up useful lookups once that data has been populated. In addition, the example that I showed you here today, you could add a number of different fields other than just pipeline, stage name, and forecast type by simply adding more fields to that for each loop that was adding fields to that data map variable. If you found this video useful or helpful, or you want to see more videos like it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave us a like, comment on the video. That not only helps our channel to grow, but also helps get our videos in front of more people, as well as getting them more often in front of you. As always, you can also reach out to us by going to club.zenatta.com, joining our community forum there, and posing additional questions or comments on any of the content that you're seeing here on the Zenatta YouTube channel. We want to make the kind of stuff that you want to see, so please head over to Club Zenatta to sign up and let your voice be heard. We'll see you in the next video. I've been Greg. Have a good one.